Welcome back to Brentwood Stories.
Hi, my name is Heather Arnay, and I'm the CEO over at the Hecksher Museum of Art in Huntington Village.
Good. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. What exactly do you do at the museum?
Well, certainly as the executive director, I kind of think of myself as partly the ambassador of the museum. So, talking to folks about the museum like we're doing today, right? Certainly want to make sure that as many people in the community know about the museum as a resource for them, for their family, is a big part of my job. So, being out in the community, talking to folks in the community, also try to be at the museum as much as possible so I can welcome folks when they come to the museum. And really, we just want everyone to know, everyone on Long Island, and certainly in communities this close as Brentwood, to know about the Hecksher Museum of Art and to just think of it as a really fun place to come hang out, no matter how old you are or young you are. It's a good place to meet up with friends. It's a great place to bring kids if you have little ones. It's a great place to go visit if you have grandparents in town or an uncle or aunt or just want to show off some of Long Island's best. You can come bring someone to the Hecksher, and we're always here in the beautiful Hecksher Park.
Nice. Yeah, it's always nice to see a director getting involved in the customer service aspect of things and being able to actually go one to one with the patrons.
Oh yeah, no, and I especially because I'm new to the community, so I just became the new executive director last summer. So I think that also adds to my interest in being out in the community, so I can meet people. And I think pretty much like wherever I go, I'm usually telling people like, "Oh yeah, I'm the new director over at the museum. Come visit the museum." And I also love learning about all our restaurants here, in Huntington Village. I'm sure that's the case in Brentwood too. We have so many family-owned restaurants. It's a great way for me to get to know our local families is just by going to local restaurants and shops and the local dry cleaners and getting to know who everyone is in town.
Yeah, and all of that's good outreach.
Yeah. So I've been to the Hecksher State Park, but I've never been to the museum. So where is the museum?
So we aren't in Hecksher State Park. So if you've been to the Hecksher State Park, then that is a different park. So there Hecksher State Park, which is I think that's on the South Shore.
Mhm.
And it's super large, right? There's like cabins, horse riding. So August and Anna Hecksher were incredibly generous. They love Long Island. It was one of their second homes. So there is the state park on South Shore. Hecksher Park is in Huntington Village in the town of Huntington on the North Shore of Long Island. And it's a smaller park than the state park. And the museum is right at the front of the park, right near the parking lot when people first come in, near the pond, near the fountain. It's a really beautiful building, building. It's just recently been restored on the outside, so it's kind of hard to miss. But sometimes I think folks aren't sure. Buildings like that can be really beautiful, but they can also be kind of intimidating. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you can walk around them and think like, I don't know if I belong in that building or what is that building? What goes on in there? So if you come to the park, yes, come in the building. It's open. You are welcome. We want everyone to come in and it's not scary, I promise.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love seeing like that kind of stuff. Big buildings can be a bit intimidating, I'm sure, but hopefully through this we can reach out to more people and
Um,
get them to know more about the museum. So, how about you tell us a little bit about how the museum was created, the Hecksher family
yeah, you
and stuff?
briefly mentioned it, how they donated it or something. Do you know the backstory?
Yeah, so the August and Anna Heckscher donated the museum and the park about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago. The museum just celebrated its 100th anniversary, and in 1920 it was established, so it celebrated the 100th anniversary in 2020 during the pandemic. And there was a really big 100th anniversary exhibition actually where we put out the majority of the original collection. So when August and Anna Heckscher donated the park and the museum. They also donated what was the starter of the permanent collection, which were a few hundred of their personal art objects. We now have several thousand pieces in the permanent collection, the nonprofit museum that's now grown the collection. But those first hundreds, a couple hundred pieces, were on exhibition for the 100th anniversary. And folks can go to the museum's website, hecksher.org, and you can actually still go view the 100th anniversary exhibition on a virtual tour. And that's a really cool thing to do.
Yeah,
This is
I
really
love
cool.
moving into the virtual aspect of it too. Continuing with the collection development stuff, for any newer pieces, what does collection development look like, or what's the process at your museum for adding in new stuff or even finding older pieces to bring back into the public eye?
Absolutely. So we have a board of directors. We're a nonprofit organization and we're accredited by the American Association of Museums, which we're really proud of. There's lots of museums across the country, lots on Long Island. We're one of the few here on Long Island that are accredited in that way. And so we have a board of directors and then we have a collections committee as well. And the collections committee has some board members, and then it also has professional collectors and folks who are especially knowledgeable in art history and art collection. And so if someone were to approach the museum with a potential gift, if they were to say, I have this Picasso in my living room, one too many Picassos. I'd really love to donate this Picasso to the museum. Then they would, contact our curatorial team, and then the curator will go and look at the object, and research. And then if the curator thinks that it's a good prospective gift, then the curatorial team will then present to the collections committee. And then the collection committee, will consider an object and then review. Sometimes they'll have, discussion. If something does get recommended by the collections committee for acquisition, then that recommendation goes to our board of directors. And then there's another layer of sort of review and conversation and discussion, and then the board of directors makes a final acquisition decision and vote. So a lot has come to the museum through that kind of process, a gift or a donation process. We also do have an acquisition fund, and that was established mostly from, I mentioned the original collection of August and Anna, when the museum really took shape in the 1950s, 1960s as a more professional museum, like when it was getting accredited and approved by the New York State as an official art museum. Then they looked at the original collection, and there were some things in that original collection that weren't quite right for the museum moving forward, and some like historic objects as opposed to art or that kind of thing. So at that time, those decisions were made to sort of deaccession those pieces that weren't aligned with the art museum part,
Mhm.
but perhaps sort of, like deaccession them to a historical museum or a university that could really use those objects in a different kind of way. So when that happened, the laws for museums are such that if you do make a decision to deaccession, which does not happen very often, as you can hear, maybe in 1961 it happened once,
Mm.
but when that happens, and it's very rare, those funds have to go in what's called an acquisition fund. So if that happens, if you make these rare decisions around deaccessioning, the funds just go then to acquire new acquisitions. So you can't, for example, right, deaccession a piece of art, or if you're a history museum, right, a historical object, and then pay the rent or an electricity bill. So those are these important museum rules. But that, and one thing that's nice about that, though, that in the early history of the museum, that there was this moment of deaccessioning, that historic objects, was that it provided a little bit of an acquisition fund so that in the future, some new art could be acquired. And that's been really important because, as you can imagine, since August and Sarah, white privileged people living in Long Island in the 1800s, their collection does not have a robust representation of diverse artists. Although we are proud to say there are some female artists represented in that collection of note, and we should all feel good about that. In fact, one of New York's most important artists, Emma Stebbins, the sculptor of the Bethesda Fountain Angel, has sculptures in the original permanent collection. So that's pretty exciting. And we'll be doing a show of her work in a few years, which is really exciting for all of us here on Long Island. That acquisition fund allows us to be able to acquire, and that's what the museum has certainly done, has had a focus on making sure that our collection is more representative of of women, of African Americans, of indigenous people from Long Island and all over the country who are extraordinary artists, but who were not as represented in the original permanent collection. So now, hopefully, when people come to the museum, they can feel more represented on the walls of the museum when they see Richard Mayhew, for example, an extraordinary, wonderful artist, nationally recognized artist who also was from here, from Long Island, in Amityville, and who has African American and Native American heritage roots here on Long Island. So, when students come from Amityville, I know they always just love seeing Richard's work on the wall and knowing that his paintings are part of our permanent collection. And it's the acquisition fund that really allows that to happen.
Very nice. And for some of this artwork, what would you say like the criteria is for like deciding what makes it into the museum?
It's, even though we're small, we're just because we are part of the AM, just like, I know this might seem silly to say, but just like the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the MoMA, any others in sort of that category, our collections committee is looking similarly at an artist's CV. Where have they shown? What is the national recognition of their work? How has their work been reviewed and critiqued over time? Is this a piece that will add to the overall, not just, it's not about value like a money kind of thing, but really about like, will this add long term to the quality of the collection? How will this piece be in conversation with the other pieces in the collection? Right now, because we only have 4,000 square feet, so one thing that's nice about our building is even though the outside might look a little bit intimidating because it's all, stone and pillars and beautiful, um, it's really quite a good size on the inside if you're at the park, you're on a date, or you're walking around with your grandma at the pond, or you're with your kids. Um, you can come into the museum and you can really in an hour or so see the whole museum, which is certainly not the case at a much larger institution. Um, but what we want to do is, because it's such a small footprint, we don't have our permanent collection up all the time. Instead, we have shows that rotate through. So whenever you come to our museum, if you come every few months, it's always going to be different. And so when we acquire something or bring something into the collection, we always think about like, well, when would we be showing that piece? And what other pieces might it be out with? And how would it be in conversation with those pieces? So that's something that our collections committee thinks about as well.
So if not everything is out all the time, obviously, do you have a storage facility on site where they are, or is it somewhere else?
We do have a storage facility in an undisclosed secret security location.
Yes.
So that all the art, of course, if it's not, the museum of itself, of course, is a secure facility. We have our security guards, it's climate controlled, all of those things to make sure that anything that is being exhibited at the museum is safe in all of those ways, right? Safe and secure, and in a temperature controlled environment, and the kinds of things that we think about to make sure that the art is being handled well. If when pieces are not on display, they are in the warehouse that similarly is safe, secure, has security, and also is temperature controlled, humidity controlled, all of those things. Because as you all know, when something isn't being shown, we need to make sure that it's protected from mold and dust and ants and everything and water and
Mhm.
all the things that could really harm a piece of art or photography or sculpture. So we think a lot about that. So yeah, so things are at the warehouse when they're not on display.
I have a background in a lot of that stuff because when I was going to school, I was originally going into archival studies.
Mhm. And we actually have an
Ooh.
archive room here at the library. So more recently, there was what was it, at the FW hall, that like the building was condemned or something, but like our boss went in and preserved all like the photos on the wall and everything. So that's become a part of our collection now.
That's great. Yeah. And, with all of us with climate change, storms, I think where everybody's thinking even more thoughtfully about all of that and collections care and just trying to make sure that we have emergency plans and are always trying to be thoughtful around innovation.
Yeah, I did my whole thesis on that. It was around disaster preparedness.
Ooh, now we know who to tap into for
Yeah.
some tips on that.
So going back to your
Yeah.
museum, of course. So when someone is walking in, what can they expect when they're visiting the museum?
Hopefully they can expect to be welcomed with a smile by our visitor services folks at the desk, our security guards who are wonderful. And we should always say, like, with the guards, they're there to protect the art, but they're not there to protect the art like from people. In that, we don't want anyone to feel intimidated about coming into the museum because there are guards there. Like the guards are there really to serve all of us, right? So, our guards are very friendly. But anyway, so I hope that they're there, that when they come, they're welcomed with big smiles. One thing that's fairly new since this fall is that we are working very hard to ensure that all of our signage is bilingual here at the museum.
Mhm.
So certainly, something that we're aware of is our growing population of native Spanish speakers here across Long Island. Over half of our school district here at Huntington is self-identifies as Latino or Hispanic. And so we wanted to make sure that the Hecksher Museum of Art was as welcoming as possible to all of our neighbors and everyone in the community. And so from the signage on the outside that just says, whether it's just telling you what hours the museum is open, to when you walk inside and you're seeing the title wall that tells you about what the exhibition's about, and then all the little pieces on the wall that tell you about each piece, as well as handouts. Everything that you see should be in both English and Spanish, as well as our family hours now are bilingual. We have more and more docents who are also bilingual. And so hopefully that can help folks feel much more welcome. Audio tours as well. So something you'll see more of are QR codes too, so that folks can scan those and hear from an artist directly about their work, or hear our curators saying telling a story about a piece. And again, all of that in both English and Spanish.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
So moving towards a lot more like augmented reality in a way too, where incorporating virtual aspects into your collection.
Yes, absolutely. Because yeah, in fact, something we'll be working on later this year is developing a sound walk connected to one of our exhibitions. So, two of the important artists in our collection, Helen Torr and Arthur Dove, lived here in Huntington in a little log cabin, really like a cottage. And the museum owns that cottage, historic cottage, and our stewards of that cottage. It's called the Dove Torr Cottage here in Centerport. And so, because it's very small, it's sort of a fragile little cottage on the side of a pond, folks can't go in it all the time. And so, when we have an exhibition of their work, which we will, that show will open in November 2023. That show's called Salt Life. And so much of it is about like, what was it like for these two artists to just be living on the edge of Mill Pond for 30 years? And before they lived in that little cottage on Mill Pond, they lived on a houseboat in
Oh, wow.
Huntington Marina. And so they really, the water was such a big part of their lives. And in Helen Torr's work, you can see oyster steaks in the water and the wind and shells and trees and branches and the ducks. And she just was constantly painting what she saw all around her in nature. So we are going to be partnering with a local sound engineer and artists and school children to go out to the cottage and collect sounds near where they lived, and then create a sound walk that folks can take to learn about the Dove Tour Cottage.
That's amazing. Reminds me, it sounds like a story walk. A lot of libraries did that during COVID because we couldn't open our doors. So it was really nice just to display a book. So that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you all went about doing that, because this is, I think, there were so many horrible things about the pandemic and we're still living in it. Some of the things that I think are, I don't know, not the good things, but some things that it has done is helped all of us learn to innovate a bit around our practices. And certainly, some of this is bringing new technology, which brings new audiences. Sometimes they're young audiences, and sometimes it's also just enhancing the accessibility of all of our work.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
definitely.
Adversity breeds innovation in the way that for the library brought us more into the digital age of things. Even the smallest library had to move to a digital aspect.
Right.
So that added a whole like
Yeah, another layer.
world of difference into our jobs where now we have a permanent virtual chat room for anyone to ask questions at any time. Yeah.
Amazing.
So
And
just
this podcast, right? I mean, did
Yeah.
you have
yeah,
the podcast before?
I
it
don't
wasn't as big as it
is
was.
now, yeah.
Yeah, it got more important over pandemic.
I mean, Zoom has been amazing because most of our interviews are over Zoom now. It's so much better for scheduling, more convenient. Really, technology has changed so many things. Like story walks started off as literally like posters in the middle of like a park, and you could like QR code the story. But now we're looking into like geolocation things.
Mhm.
So like just putting it down somewhere, and like
Yes.
when you walk to that part of the town, you can listen to the story. So it's really amazing.
Mhm. Exactly.
So you did mention you were having the one event in November 2023. What type of events do you normally have at the museum?
There's a lot of community events. I would say that every month there's probably 4 different things that are happening for sure. Weekends are a very active time here at the museum. So whether it's a family hour or it's first Fridays, which are kind of late out, like more like a happy hour kind of. So first Fridays, what it sounds like, the first Friday of every month, usually 5 to 8, we have a band play, some live music. There's late hours, some wine, stuff, some refreshments, just to try to have kind of a more chill environment for folks to come and maybe meet up with a friend Friday after work and just come hang out at the museum. So, that's first Fridays. We have family hours on the weekends where parents and their little ones can come and there's art activities. We just had huge Lunar New Year celebration in January. We had over 900 people in one
Oh,
day
wow.
here celebrating Chinese New Year. We tried to be thoughtful around, not overwhelming people with events, but we certainly have them. I would say probably every week there's something going on that's a public event. And in addition to, of course, you can just always come to the museum. We're open Thursday through Sunday, noon to 5. If you want to come and it's not during those hours, you just have to contact the museum. Very often that could be arranged, especially for groups. But even if you're just 2 or 3 people and you just for some reason need to be able to come on a day or time that we're not officially open, we're a small museum. I just always encourage people to just contact us if they want to come on a special time. And then, we are suggested donation. So that basically means you can come in our museum for free. There is no required donation for anyone. We don't want money to be the barrier. So we're thrilled to partner with the Brentwood Library and others with the Museum Pass program. It's fantastic. And, of course, we have folks who join as members of the museum, and we love that and encourage that too. And just like any nonprofit organization, of course, we're supported by those kinds of programs, but we also don't want anyone to feel like they can't come into the museum because they don't have the funds to come in and pay admission. So we are suggested donation admission.
It's
It's a good
amazing.
model.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to your Lunar New Year event, you said you had like what, 900
900 people.
people?
It was a lot. Yeah.
Um, but what would you say is the most well attended event you've had?
Besides that one.
Besides that
I
one?
know. That really was one of our highest attended events. But I will also say our draw out event, which happens in the fall, we get regularly 500, 600 people to that. So that is, so folks should definitely look out for that. That's in the fall. It's usually around September. It's here at the park in front of the museum and in the museum. We partner with lots of other arts organizations too. And so for folks who do know of the museum and the park, there's like a big circle in front of our museum of trees and flowers and grass. And so in that circle, we partner with other, as I said, other arts organizations and set up like easels and people can paint and draw plein air, and there's a model set up so you can draw the model or you can just draw whatever you'd like. But there's painting and drawing in the park. There's tons of stuff for kids. We always put out art books for free too. So, anything that we are sort of culling from our own book collection, we'll put out, and people always like that too. And it's just a really, really big sort of arts festival day. So draw out in the fall is really big. And, whenever we have an opening, I would say, we have several hundred people come to the opening weekends. I think there are some of us who like a crowd, and then there are some of us to come to the museum when it's a little bit more quiet. And that's one of the things that's really nice about our museum. If you like to come out to a crowd, the public programming events are nice and they happen about once a week, and you can go to First Fridays or you can go to Draw Out or something like Lunar Fest and really come connect with the community in a big way. But then, if you're maybe not so into crowds, you could just come on a Thursday at 2 o'clock and it's nice and quiet. We obviously have a lot of partnerships with school programs. And if anyone is listening to this podcast who is connected with a school and you're thinking like, I wonder if my school does anything with the Hecksher, we always encourage folks to just ask, because if for some reason your school isn't connected to us, we'd love them to be. Because we partner with like over 80 schools across the region, but there are still many more who we'd love to connect with.
Yeah, that's amazing. And kids love field trips. That's
Oh,
my favorite part of going to school.
Exactly. They love field trips. So we have lots of school buses come with the field trips, which is great because of course we missed them very much during the pandemic when that had to stop. And then also we have arts educators who will go into the schools. So if schools are looking for programming, our arts educators will bring programming to schools as well. And then for high school students, we have a program called Long Island's Best, where high school students can actually submit their work for consideration to be hung at the museum. And so every spring we take down all the work that's on the walls, and for a month, only high school artists' work are on the walls, and that's called Long Island's Best. And so that's a really wonderful exhibition. Happens around April every year.
That's
very
amazing.
nice. So, let's move on to a little bit about you. So, what would you say your personal favorite facts or events are at the museum?
I enjoy when we do something connected with another community organization. This year gives us a lot of wonderful opportunity to do that because we have a show up that's going to be up all year. It just opened and it runs the whole year, and it's called Home. It's called Raise the Roof, the Home and Art. And, the idea of home means different things to different people. It literally means different things to different peoples. There were people here on this place of land, and then other people arrived and decided it was then theirs. And that's really complicated, right? So the idea of home is a complex term. It's not easy
Yeah.
as far as who's home. There are people who have immigrated here. There are people who migrated here. There are people who have been brought here not consensually, right? Historically to this country. But, and then in other cases, this is the country that people fled to out of time of war or conflict, other places, and very much it became a safe haven. So from a national standpoint, home can be complicated. During the pandemic, came to mean a lot of things that for some folks who were fortunate enough to have a home, sometimes at the very beginning of the pandemic, during the lockdowns, suddenly people's home became everything. And home became like home, work, the restaurant, child care center, kindergarten, school, like everything in one place. And that could, for some folks, that was wonderful. And for some people, that was really stressful and difficult time. And so we're hoping that the museum can be a safe space for folks to really process some of that. What we've all just gone through is really intense. And maybe we haven't had a chance to talk about that as a community. So something I'm doing this year that's new here for the museum is we're doing dinners with the director once a month. So it's a dinner with myself and then a guest each month, usually someone who like leads another community organization or is maybe a thought leader around an issue. And then we're just going to sell 10 tickets at the dinner table so that folks can have dinner with one another and engage in conversation at a table in the museum. So it's just a dinner table will be set up. So it's sort of like come into our home here
Yeah.
at the museum and let's have dinner and let's talk about it.
Very
Oh,
nice.
that sounds so cute. I love that.
So we're going to move on to our last question now, where we want you to discuss the importance of your museum in a cultural and community aspect and why you think it's important to visit the Hecksher Museum.
Well, so I think it kind of connects to what we were just talking about. Like, I think
Yes.
it's about visiting the museum, but I also think it's about the museum being part of that cultural contract, which means if we are part of our community, then it's not just about that it's important for you to visit the museum, but it's important for the museum to be in conversation with you
Mhm.
and others. So, I do hope folks will come to the museum and that they will engage in conversation with us about what they see. You'll always see at the museum a part of the museum that's for you to share with us what you're thinking and be part of the conversation, to become part of the exhibition. The show that just closed, Long Island's The Biennial, there was a piece in the biennial by an artist, and that piece involved weaving. And so for that show, we created a wall that was called the Community Weaving. And we encouraged folks to weave in their words or thoughts about the exhibition, about what was going on in the world at that time. There were strips of newspaper headlines that people could put into the weaving, or they could write their own things on pieces of paper or ribbon or anything they wanted. And and that was the community weaving project for home. We have constructed kind of like a shelving unit that looks like a home. There's shelves and it's a whole wall. And then there's pieces of paper on the side and boxes of pens and markers. And we're just asking people that question, like that we discussed earlier, like what does home mean to you?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about this? And write them down and then, put them on the shelf. So people are filling up this house with their own thoughts. And then we have a video monitor and we're showing stories that are all people from the community sharing their own stories about what they think about this, like what does home mean to them. And they're all really different stories, and we're also similarly like inviting folks if they want to be part of that project, that sort of oral history video project, that they should let us know too. So, I think that's sort of a long-winded answer, but I feel like it's not one way.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know,
No,
if
that's good.
if we're part of our community, then it means both. So it's like, come to our dinner table, let's have a conversation. We want you to come and see the work and tell us what you think about it. And hopefully it's going to get you thinking about something that then when you leave, you're going to talk to somebody else and have a conversation. And it's really that conversation that it's all about.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for coming out to talk to us and being on our podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we hope lots of folks from your community will use their museum pass and come visit the museum. And even if they don't, they're always welcome here at the Hecksher.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Are you interested in being interviewed on Brentwood Stories? Email adultprograms@brentwoodnylibrary.org for a chance to be featured on the podcast. That's adultprograms@brentwoodnylibrary.org.